So honestly, it's a really simple thing to make pads, and if you just know a few things about different parameters which we tweak, it'll be really easy for you to do this yourself and make it fit the way you want it to be for your track. So to begin with, you can choose your oscillators. So this is what it sounds like right now. The choice of oscillator will change the texture of the sound, but there are also more things which make a significant difference to the sound, like the number of voices, the filter, and the envelope. So let's go into all those things one by one and see what they do. To begin with, let's increase the voices. Having more voices makes the sound seem wider because all those voices are detuned slightly from each other. So when you look at this graph, you can see that all these voices are detuned from each other, and as you reduce this, the amount of detune reduces. So they come closer to each other in pitch. So let's hear that. I'll switch off oscillator B and let's see how this sounds. As we increase the detune, you have more and more voices which are further apart in pitch. So this gives an impression of width. If you overdo it, it doesn't sound very harmonic. So the first thing you want to do is keep your detune maybe around this much so that it doesn't go too far apart in pitch. Now you can switch on the other oscillator and play a chord. So it sounds a little bit like a pad but not too much. Again, you can increase the voices here too. You can tweak the detune amount depending on your taste and depending on how much width you want the sound to have. So this is about the oscillators and the voices. Choosing different oscillators gives you different tonal textures. You can notice the sine is very smooth. A very smooth sound. But you don't have to go with this because as you'll see, when you switch on the filter, you can always filter out a very harmonic, rich sound, and that gives you a different kind of feeling versus using a sine sound on its own. So next we'll look at the envelope. Now, when you're talking about pads, usually they have a really slow attack because they come in slowly. So you could have something like this. It's up to you how much you want to do. And then they also have a very slow release, so that as soon as you leave the key, they don't stop. They linger on for a while. So you get that by having a higher release time. And now next, you can also increase the decay. So this gives the basic envelope of the pad. And now the next thing you want to do is switch on the filter. So what this does is it filters out the frequencies which are above this point. And right now, only oscillator A is going into the filter. You can make oscillator B also go into the filter by clicking it over here. So now we already have a very smooth sound. Now there are a couple of parameters over here, a couple of knobs over here. The cutoff decides at what point this filter starts acting. So if I increase it, you'll have less of these frequencies being filtered out. So if I'm here, it won't accept the frequencies above 3000 Hz. So if you want a brighter sound, then you would increase this. If you want a warmer sound, you would decrease it. Next, let's talk about LFOs. What if you want to increase this sound gradually, like this, and then make it keep going back and forth? For that purpose, you could use an LFO. So let's take this LFO and map it to the cutoff. So that way it would go according to this graph. And the rate of open and close is determined by this value over here, which is 1/4 right now. I can make it lower. And all this is synced with my BPM in my DAW. So if I want to make it even slower, I could make it 1 bar. I could make it even slower. If you don't want the LFO to sync with the BPM in your DAW, then you can always switch off the BPM sync button. And let's say I don't want to open it so much and close it so much. I want it to be more subtle. Then all I have to do is just reduce this a little bit, changing how much it's opening and closing over there. So I'm not changing the initial cutoff value, but I'm changing where it ends. So now it opens and closes less. If I wanted to open and close much more, then I just increase this all the way. So it'll open till here. So it's pretty simple. Now, one more thing you could do is, if you want it to be really fast, like a stuttery kind of a effect with the pad, then you can just increase this rate. So if you have like a 1/16th note, it would be like this. That sounds pretty cool. And you can use that in the background. Sometimes you might want to have one pad which is with sustained notes and one pad which is something like this. And now there are a couple of more things you could do. You could map these LFOs even to other things. Like this is called wavetable position. That's the position of this wave. So if you map it to this, then the LFO will change the wavetable position according to the LFO rate. So if that's too complicated to understand, let's just do it and see what happens. Let's remove this mapping. So you can hear a subtle movement. It's very subtle because this is a sine wave and it doesn't really move that much. So let's try this with another waveform. So you can hear a subtle movement that's coming from the change of the wavetable position. We can change the rate of that as well in the same way as we've done earlier. So you can map this LFO to any of these things and that will change the wavetable position according to the LFO rate. So this is good if you want to provide some movement without it being too obvious. It works pretty well like that. You could also map the LFO to the pan, which will make it go left and right according to the LFO rate again. So now that you know how to do this part, let's make it more like how we would want the final result to be. So we don't want so much of variation in the sound. We want it to be subtle movement. But then again, it's your choice. If you want to have this map to the cutoff like we had earlier, you can have that as well. And now if you want to use different LFO rates for different things, then you can use these other LFOs. So there's no difference between LFO 1, LFO 2, LFO 3 and 4. But it's just that you have the option to use different rates on different things. So like in LFO 1, I can have the rate of 1/2. And in LFO 2, I can have anything like 1/16. So I can control this cutoff with the 1/16 rate. And I can control all these other things with the 1/2 rate. So like that, I have more flexibility. So let's just see how this sounds. We're back to 1/16th on the filter. And I forgot to mention that you can also change the shape of the LFO, and that gives you different kinds of movement. You can do that by adding new points or moving the existing points. But in this tutorial, we won't be going over that because otherwise it will get too complicated. So let's move on. Now you could do many more things with this, but basically that's the basics of how to make different kinds of pads. Now you also have this resonance. So let's see what happens when we increase the resonance. So this adds a different kind of a characteristic to the sound. I don't know how to describe it, but let's bypass this and let's see. You might not notice much difference in this particular sound, but I think when you try different waveforms and you experiment, you'll be able to hear a different kind of tonal characteristic coming when you increase the resonance. And next we can see the drive. So when you increase it a lot, then it starts crackling. So you don't really have to use much of this. It just makes the sound fatter. And this is also doing a similar kind of thing. Not exactly, but it's kind of similar. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you have to customize this sound more and more, you can do the same stuff that we talked about. One is to change the oscillator. So by changing the oscillator, you have different kinds of textures. That's one. Second is you can change the envelope. You can make it come slowly. You can make it come faster. You can increase the release, reduce the release, all that kind of stuff. And next obviously you have these LFOs. So you can map LFOs to all these things. And next you can also add some effects, like you can add some compression and some reverb. Whenever you add reverb to this kind of a sound, then it's a good idea to cut the lows because you don't want to have any low end rumble. You can also add an EQ so that you can EQ out the frequencies which are disturbing. You want to have the low end, but you don't want the absolute lows, so you can remove up to 100 Hz maybe. This makes it cleaner. If you want the sound to be more gritty, you can use a saw wave, or you could use something which has more harmonics. For brighter sound, you just need to increase the cutoff. You can also increase the voices even more. And if you have more voices, then you'll be able to detune a little more without it seeming odd. So that's another reason to increase the voices. So now we have a really lush sound. You can also increase the octave. So now I'm playing multiple notes at a time in the form of chords. So that's why it sounds more lush also. So whenever you're using these kind of pads, it's a good idea to have at least 3 or 4 notes playing at a time so that you get the right effect. Because if I play one note right now, it'll sound like this. But if I play 3 or 4 notes, I'm actually playing 6 notes, but anyway, a chord on 2 octaves. So that kind of thing really sounds lush and big. And usually in pads, you don't add the sub, but if you want, you can add the sub also. Right now, since we have this EQ on, you won't hear the sub, but usually you don't add the sub because you would want to have a different bass texture, which you can control independently. So you could have a Reese bass or something which fits under this pad. So that way the combination of this pad and the bass would be really big. And you can see our other videos to see how to do that. We have videos on how to make a Reese bass and how to make a pluck bass and all kinds of other textures. This video was a little different because we wanted to explain what the knobs do and how you can customize your sound. So hope you found the tutorial useful. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.